Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When we talk about the greatest generation, very oftentimes our minds drift to our own fathers or grandfathers, those that served during the Second World War, but it's probably a little bit less common to think in terms of the women who served during that period, not only in the armed forces, but also on the home front. There were 16 million women. Ironically, it was about 16 million that went overseas to fight. We think of the Western European, the European conflict, Mediterranean, North Africa theater. My own dad was on an aircraft carrier in the South Pacific, but there's very little discussion until recent years about what was going on the domestic front. Because if we didn't have those Rosie the Riveters putting those Hellcats and Wildcats and Grumman Avengers together, some 15,000 aircraft that went into the South Pacific theater and took down some 6,000 Japanese planes. My dad was on a Grumman Avenger. And so today we're privileged to recognize Rosie the Riveter Day. But instead of having a very stale day that we recognize, we're going to issue a challenge today before we introduce some of our special guests. In Berks County, we started a Rosie the Riveter garden behind the Berks Military History Museum. It's a special variety of rose that's going to be planted there. It's going to memorialize and commemorate individual Rosies who served in our own community. With Penn State, Cooperative Extension, Master Gardener programs, there's no reason why each of us couldn't have a Rosie the Riveter garden in our own State House district. It's gone unnoticed even in our own family because my dad didn't talk much. I don't even think he had the capacity to talk much about World War II and his own experience. And I never had the maturity, perhaps, as a youth to ask my mother what she was doing during World War II. And that conversation has been ongoing, including last night on the way back from church. I leaned back and I had read what Rosie's made during the course of a week, and I said, "Mom, how much money did you make?" And I had read the average was $30 to $50, and Mom said she made about $50 a week as a Rosie the Riveter, working 6 days a week, long hours, and she showed up back home. She was the youngest of 8 children. She had lost her father in 1939, and she handed that money over to her mother to take care of household responsibilities. And Dorothy Trade, who I'm going to introduce more fully in just a minute, has the same experience in terms of duty and honor and country and faith and family. Seated in the back of the auditorium, and I'm going to ask them to stand if they would and remain standing, and we'll recognize them as a group. If you were down in the East Rotunda, you saw Rosie the Riveter statue, and it will be there until this afternoon if you hadn't had the opportunity yet. It's traveling all over the country. We had the privilege in Berks County to have it for a couple weeks. But Warren Haig, who's the Spirit of 45 Foundation representative, who brought that into the bowels of this building early in the morning and helped set it up, is back there with Jim Eamon, a Marine. I made the mistake one time of saying ex-Marine Jim Eamon, and he readily corrected me. But we have Jesse, Rosie, let's give it a flex, okay, and Christine, and that is her real name, by the way, Rosie, in the middle there. And we have another very special guest I'm going to introduce in just a second. But Dorothy Trade has some guests up in the gallery, our real live Rosie up front here. And I asked them to stand as well. And joining the group today is John Fleming. John Fleming stopped by the Berks Military History Museum 2 weeks ago. He had a German flag wrapped up that he pulled down from a building on April 25th, 1945, at the very end of the European conflict there, when the Russians and United States troops met at the Elbe River. So let's recognize these very special guests that we have in the Hall of the House today. At a period in our lives, teenage years and early 20s, where we're contemplating our future and training for what lies ahead, there were nearly 16 million women who decided that duty's call meant them taking on some of the very uncertain roles, some of the heavy lifting, and some of the dangerous work that was going on in America's factories. And in fact, without these women sacrificing and sweating and putting 6, in some cases in critical war industries, 7-day weeks, what was going on in the South Pacific or Europe could not nearly have been as efficacious. And so while other generations have focused on me and my future and my education and my salary and my paycheck and my family, Dorothy Trait, who is the oldest of 7, and I'll ask Dorothy to stand, and Conchetta Gillen, who is the youngest of 8, decided that duty, service, honor, and country were the most important things in their lives during World War II. Thank you, and God bless you.